off. Can you
All
hear
right.
me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
I
you?
can hear. We can hear
Okay,
you.
so I may get kicked off, just so you know, and then if we're in the middle of something, you
All
may
right.
have to. Okay, so Kashyapa, I'm going to go ahead. We'll start recording, and I'll go ahead and introduce you. But we've had a number of people on listening to this discussion, which
Oh,
I'm sure they have found very, very interesting. So let me go ahead and start and just welcome the attendees who are joining us this morning. This is All Life is Yoga, which is being hosted by the LaGrasse Center here in Fountain in South Carolina. And as some of you may know, over the past several months, our focus has been on Ayurveda. And this is the ancient system of health that's originated in India. So we've hosted various experts in this field, such as Sonia Masako, who spoke on Ayurveda's approach to health and healing, Sunny Rose Healy, who introduced us to the art and science of Dinacharya, which is a customized daily routine to support health and well-being. And then a couple weeks ago, a very engaging talk by Stephen Heinberger on the integration of Ayurveda and the Vedic birth chart. And last week, Maria Greer on the integration of Ayurveda with yoga asana and pranayama. So today we continue this journey and are extremely pleased to have Kashyapa Fisher with us, who will share his thoughts on the future of Ayurveda and how this timeless body of knowledge may best serve humanity at this present moment. Kashyapa is founder and director of Arogya, a New Mexico-based Panchakarma clinic and Center for Advanced Training in Clinical Ayurveda and Panchakarma. And I first met Kashyapa a number of years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, while living in Albuquerque. And of course, Vladimir has been in collaboration with him for the past several years, working with his students on the Sanskrit translation of classical Ayurveda texts. So Kashyapa, we are just extremely grateful to be hosting you today. And as our attendees will see, he is truly a brilliant and extremely dedicated Ayurvedic practitioner and instructor. So welcome, Kashyapa, and I will just hand it over to you.
thanks so much. I'm also grateful to be here. It's a lovely way to spend a Saturday morning with all of you. So the future of Ayurveda, it's a question that comes up, I think, a lot for students and anyone that approaches it. This topic, which is, of course, ancient medical system. What relevance does an ancient medical system have today, number one, and then is it even going to survive into the future? Does it have any utility for the future, with a consideration of where we're going? So I think it's a nice topic for today. So I'd like to start with a little quote from Kabir, a poem from Kabir, who is a great saint in India, and he says, "Pada hua to kya hua, jaisa peda khajur, Panti ko chayanahin, pala lage ati dur." So what Kabir says is, he says, so what? Kabir is always very candid, right? He says, so what if you are big and tall, like a date palm tree? Panti ko chayanahin, that date palm tree, though it's very tall, it doesn't cast any shadow, any chaya, that can give a weary traveler a place to rest and escape the sun. And its fruits are very difficult to reach. So though the date, we've all had dates and loved dates. So though the date has such sweet fruit and is such a tall and stunning tree, Kabir says, what about this tree? This tree is like useless, insofar as it doesn't give any shade, and though it has this nice fruit, it's hard to reach. So I say this poem because I think we have to look at this topic and within the light of pragmatism. And I think that's really the glory of Ayurveda, is that it's such a pragmatic system, right? It is really within the entirety of kind of the Vedic cosmos and all the different things, Ayurveda really kind of excels in a pragmatic approach to life, right? So Ayurveda is something that wants to be sure that whatever knowledge it contains is not held up far away, right? And that it is always available to give that comfort and that succor to the weary traveler, unlike this date palm tree. So coming to that, then we have to look at what is the relevance of Ayurveda historically, what is the relevance today, and what is it really, right? Because anything exists for us really only in terms of relevance. You know, we seek what we need, and what we don't need, we hardly notice, or could care less about. So what then is the relevance? And I'll start with, with Future of Ayurveda, we have to kind of define terms. So first, I'd like to define the future, and we have to define the future in the context of today, really looking at where we are and what we need here today as a people, as a society, as a civilization, as individuals. And from there, we can look at what is Ayurveda and what might its relevance be to us now, what might its relevance be to us in the future, and how can it adapt into the future? It sounds okay? It's a worthwhile way of going forward, Radhe? Okay.
Wonderful.
So, we live in very exciting times, right? We live in which we're having new medical advancements every day. And the presentation of medicine that we are experiencing today is looking already so much different from even 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? And that rate of advancement and technological breakthrough is only speeding up. Right? Now we can do organ transplants we never dreamed of even 50 years ago. Right? We can do organ reconstruction and even organ generation. Right? We have IVF treatments happening for conception. We can do stem cell injections to regrow tissue. Right? So we live in an age of kind of unprecedented medical breakthrough. We also live in an age of unprecedented societal and change and technological change generally, right? We have a digitization of life that is happening. We're all meeting here on Zoom through our computers, right? And having very intimate conversation and exchange from, different places all over the world. And this, gives us a different way of expressing through our minds, and also different mechanisms of being in our bodies. How we use our bodies is day by day so different from how our ancestors used our bodies, even how the generation just before us used their bodies, right? And that is changing the economy of skills, what is valuable in the marketplace as far as what we learn and how we orient ourselves, and has even epigenetic ramifications as far as how our eyes are changing to process light, so many things, right? We live in an age where space travel is already a reality. And we look forward even to multi-planet civilization. We live in a place where our control of internal space is we have an unprecedented ability to control internal space with regards to air conditioning, climate control, all of these sorts of things. We have an age in which we have massive kind of cultural transfusion and change and amalgamation, because people have never been able to move about in such large numbers from place to place, right, as they are now. Right? Entire populations that are facing genocide or oppression can up and move now. We have this rise of artificial intelligence, unlocking hitherto yet unfathomed frontiers within technology, within data processing, etc. And we also stand on a brink of the potential of merging that artificial intelligence with human intelligence physiologically. Ecologically also, we live in very unique times. We are in a new archaeological age. This was announced, I think, in the 1960s, based on soil composition. And researchers found that you could take a sample of soil from any place in the world and find 2 new items in it that hitherto is not common at all, and that is number one, concrete, number two, chicken bone. It is kind of that one was surprising, just I guess how much chicken is actually processed, but such that it is in virtually every soil sample we find. So that's also showing humanity's impact upon the actual surface of the earth. And then, of course, we're all aware of the reduction of old growth forests, the spread of urban environments, the spread of light pollution, all these different things, deregulated weather patterns. And then, of course, there is the epidemics before us, such as COVID, wars in Yemen, and etc. And these are actually nothing new or nothing novel in any way, but have been with us since the very beginning, these kinds of pandemics and wars and all of that. Then today, what is unique about consciousness itself? Perception. What is the current state of that? You know, now we have this capacity of the macro processing of human experience, perhaps more than ever before, through the internet and the kind of internet of the mind that is before us. And this gives us a potential, on the one hand, to really have great leaps and bounds in our consciousness. Beyond just our individual concerns, we can open ourselves up to the experience of the world. And at the same time, it poses the danger of becoming totally immersed within the realm of ideas and moving further from the physical and from our actual bodies than ever before, right? And there are some interesting trends that kind of, or data points that kind of illustrate this. For instance, if we look at sex, you know, the GSS survey within the CDC in 2017 found that estimated 36% decline in frequency of sexual activity amongst American adults. But at the same time, we have more than 95% of males and 70% of females use pornography. And so this is, again, this kind of immersion in the world of ideas that people are still thinking about sex as they always have before, but actually having a lot less. And so too, we think about exercise, for instance. There are so many training programs online, but many people are exercising a lot less. And again, because we find ourselves so much more in front of the computer, so much more on the smartphones and like that. So we have the things of our time that are unique and the things of our times that are not unique. But what we do have for sure, the world over, is we have the emergence of kind of a new digital and technological culture that is breaking old established cultural trends and identities and really rapidly creating a new identity regardless of kind of ethnic or national or historical culture. And so sitting from this place of the present, then what do we anticipate for the future? Because none of us know the future. But what do we anticipate from the future? You know, on one hand, with going back kind of point by point, I think medically, there is a bit of enthusiasm and anticipation of, you know, yet further breakthroughs that can really change the way we manage disease, injury, and even longevity. You know, already we have a greater perfluence of hyperbaric technology, pulse electromagnetic frequency technology, which can really accelerate the rates of wound healing. We have a capacity to perform remote surgeries now and even operate surgeries through nanoparticles. There is the discovery of all kinds of new substances such as NAD+, right, which can stimulate mitochondrial function and regeneration, that gives some glimmer that perhaps we can expand the human lifespan in a radical way well beyond 100 years. We are looking, as I aforementioned, at this ability to link human consciousness to the internet quite literally, right, through the integration of different AI tech with the human nervous system, and have this capacity to perhaps download and preserve identity and mind eternally. We look forward to all kinds of technological breakthroughs to combat and control climate change by manually changing the composition of the atmosphere of our Earth, right? Developing new propulsion technology that can antiquate the combustion engine and operate without burning any fossil fuels, etc. Right? And again, there is this anticipation of multiplanetary civilization, which is, some of the projects that are currently on the table as soon as 2030, we're looking at having humans abiding on Mars. And so all of this potential for forward stride and yet more radical change, which I think our current culture ascribes a certain degree of glory to. No. So some questions here, looking at the future, is one, what makes this so glorious? Is it in fact a forward stride? And is any of this in fact unprecedented or unique? Or within a Vedic perspective, more just of another cyclical pattern of time and humanity? What I can see, and any of you can disagree with me, is that our current civilization, modernity, if you will, is born from this sort of unquenchable desire, an unquenchable need to control our physical environment and to control all aspects of life. There is a certain ethos that while in the past we were at the mercy of nature and circumstance, now, day by day, we are more and more becoming the masters of nature. And through our technology, we can move mountains, drain lakes, travel to the moon, to Mars, create life simulacra, and surely someday we will have complete control, right? Descartes' vision will be realized, and we will be able to understand every aspect of every point of the universe, and thereby be able to eliminate suffering and any need for labor, hardship, and even mortality itself. And while we may not yet understand all these facets of reality, surely we will. Surely we have at least the basic, now essential framework, which within context of Ayurveda would seem to then overcome and antiquate any need for mythos or superstition or any of these kinds of classical and ancient traditions and approaches to thought. Surely we will, before some amount of time, have a synthesis of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and thereby be able to eradicate all mystery even from creation. And so by this desire, by this need, we are propelled forward as a civilization. But is it again actually forward, and are we actually evolving, is a question that I would like to raise. For in reflection, it is within this context of gaining control over nature and all the facets of life to the point of eradicating suffering, eradicating mystery, perhaps we have already passed our zenith in that. If we go back, for instance, to the 1960s, it was a time of great enthusiasm. I wasn't personally alive, so I can't say, but I could communicate with others and the study of history. But really in the 60s, we had beaten polio. We had largely eradicated smallpox, the plague. Lifespan from the beginning of the 20th century had increased by over 20 years in the West. It was a tremendous time, full of optimism. And surely, of course, there is the feeling that we will eliminate cancer next and all these different things. But in the words of futurist Patrick Farley, he says, the future has been running behind schedule. Because in spite of our pulse electromagnetic frequency technology, all of this capacity for this increased capacity for organ transplants, etc., the lifespan itself has not really increased substantially since then. And not only that, also we can see that the leisure, the amount of time we have for leisure, for simple relaxation, for time with our families, for spiritual pursuits, is actually continually reducing since the 1960s. Now our successes, in spite of all of our technological breakthroughs, our actual successes in healthcare and in happiness are less, and our crises are more. We have this capacity for organ transplants, but the medical cases that actually require it are very few. We have a much greater success in the delivery of premature births than ever before, but also as of 2006, 12.5% of pregnancies ended up with premature delivery, which was a 13% increase from 1992 and a 30% increase from 1982. So as we create more solutions, we create more problems also that require those solutions. And more we find that our new breakthroughs in medicine are only controlling symptomatology rather than actually eradicating disease. You know, now 46% of Americans are obese. More than 34 million Americans have diabetes, which is more than 13% of the population. 1 in 6 Americans take or have taken psychiatric drugs. 50 to 90% of women in America, I know there are a number of people from all over the world, please forgive me, I just have the stats before me from the US where I live. 50 to 90% of women report primary dysmenorrhea. This is a natural function, menstruation, right? And for the majority of women, this has become a painful function, which clearly shows a loss of balance, right? As a species. And beyond that, a growing crisis very few are speaking about, COVID takes all the attention, is that here in the US, 13.1% of women are infertile. Women of childbearing age are infertile. More girls are realizing puberty earlier. There is a decline in egg quality, greater incidence of miscarriage. Again, I already mentioned the greater incidence of preterm delivery, of premature delivery. And this is not unique to women, but men also. The average sperm count since 1973 has reduced by 59%. And this is not unique to men, to women. This is not unique to humans even, but we're finding similar presentations in other species, including alligators, otters, and minks. So in spite of all of our technological progress and innovation, we have a crisis within the realms of healthcare. We have a crisis in fertility. And beyond that, we have a crisis of basic hygiene, how to take care of ourselves. We have a crisis in organizing our schedules and having a time to just be. We have a crisis of identity and a crisis of knowledge that is before us. And our response is, as society is always, it seems, more technology, more control, and more search for the cure, but very little attention to the cause. And so we invest more financial resources, and yet we're getting more and more marginal results. COVID is a tremendous example of this. Without going into any controversy, just look at our results, our capacity to actually control the COVID, right, and go on with our lives, and how much financial resource of time and human energy has been invested into this. Well, with little result, really. And so what we find in this ethos that we have all kind of been born into and unconsciously adopted, you know, as our modus operandi, is this kind of ethos of perpetual sacrifice, a perpetual sacrifice of the present for a hope for the future, that we will have the cure for cancer. You know, there is a very beautiful poem I'd like to read an excerpt of for you from William Wordsworth. This is from his greater work Excursion in 1814. And Wordsworth, you know, he was an English poet sitting right at the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. And so he's speaking these words, this poem, kind of seeing his country of England, which was a pastoral country, you know, farmland everywhere, suddenly be torn apart for the implementation of factories. And you know, he's seeing this massive migration from the countryside to cities to work in these factories. So this is his poem. He says, "With you I grieve, when on the darker side of this great change I look, and there behold such outrage done to nature as compels that indignant power to justify herself." Right? That, you know, this propulsion that we have that has caused us to subjugate nature, there is a, consciously or unconsciously, there is a horror in us beholding that, what we have done. And so we have to, there unconsciously, but there's this mechanism of justifying it continually. You know, it is necessary, all the plastic, it is necessary, all the roads. Then, in full many a region, once like this, the assured domain of calm simplicity and pensive quiet, an unnatural light, prepared for never resting labor's eyes, breaks from a many-windowed fabric huge, and at the appointed hour, a bell is heard, a local summons from the factory to unceasing toil. Men, maidens, youths, mother and little children, boys and girls, they all enter, and each the wonted task resumes. Within this temple, where is offered up to this idea of gain, the master idol of the realm, perpetual sacrifice. Well, I think it really strikes deep, his words. At the very beginning of this process, he was able to see so much that now we are just unconsciously born into. Unconsciously born into this temple of worship where we are in this perpetual sacrifice of the moment above all else, to this idol of potential, of gain, of the future, of breakthrough, of technology. So that is an exploration of the first question. Are we actually progressing? Though our technology is progressing, are we progressing? And again, perhaps greater to explore, is there really any novelty to our situation now that we can perform surgery with nanobots and we can travel between planets? Situationally, is there really any more novelty for humanity that now we can do these things than it was for our great ancestors, Homo erectus, when they invented fire? Or even for our more recent ancestors, just a few generations ago, with the development of the steam engine and the ability to travel at such a greater speed. And most to the point, what is the impact of any of this technology and circumstance on our more perennial concerns of joy and suffering? Because that is really the heart of it. We all want to live in peace and in joy, and we all want to avoid suffering. And so how are we doing in the current state of affairs? And looking at where affairs are going, how does it look like we're going to be doing? And if you have any qualm with how we're doing, the simplest solution is but to look for a shift in perception, because it is a perception, this perception of perpetual sacrifice that Wordsworth discusses, that needs a shift, or that is going to bring about any real qualitative and substantive change. And that is what Ayurveda has to offer above all else. It is not Triphala or Panchakarma, though these things are nice. But more fundamentally, what it offers an alternative perception. It is not necessarily contradictory perception. It is just a different one, right? It is an opportunity, one, to examine the perception that we are currently working through, most likely in most of our cases unconsciously. And to appraise, how has that perception served us up to this point? And then what are the alternatives? And so Ayurveda is but that, it is an alternative perception. So now we have some relevance. Looking at our current situation, well, everything is not totally copacetic. And so what are some alternative perceptions that we can approach this situation with, this situation in time, and this greater situation of phenomena that is simply life and being? So from here we come to, what is Ayurveda? What does it have to offer as far as the perception? So I will tell you, Charaka, Ayurveda, we have these three, what are called Bruhatrai, these three great texts. And they are the principal texts we have still. Historically, there are many more than just these three. And even now, there are many more than these three, but these three hold preeminence currently. So one of those is called the Charaka Samhita. So in that, the sage who is speaking, he defines Ayurveda as this. Swalakshanataha sukha sukhato hita hitataha pramana pramana tascha yatascha ayuhu yanyayushani cha dravya guna karmani vidayati ataha apyayurvedaha. So he says this Ayurveda, it is that which has its own presentation, its own way of imparting knowledge about sukha and asukha, about, first and foremost, about sukha is joy, is a goodness, is what is desired, is what is beneficial. So it presents the ways, the means, the functionality of sukha and asukha, or dukkha, suffering, right? It is the knowledge of joy and suffering. Hita ahitataha, what is good and what is not good for that. Beyond simply what is the sukha, what is joy, how do you generally realize it? What is good for joy, what is bad for joy? What is conducive to joy, what is not conducive to joy? What is conducive to suffering, what is not conducive to suffering? So many of us, I can list myself included, we know, most of us, we want joy, we don't want suffering. But we are largely so helpless at how to realize that. And we are like children that we really don't understand causally what actually contributes towards that, what doesn't. With our families, with our relationships, how we communicate to those that are closest to us. Largely, we are unconscious that if I say, hey, what's wrong with you? Why would you say that? This is not conducive to joy. This is not a way of speaking that will be conducive to joy. And there really is an innocence for many of us that we are helpless in a way we don't even realize it. We're just, the unconscious program just going. So Ayurveda is first and foremost, it is that knowledge of joy and suffering, what is good for it, what is not good for it, right? And therefore, what will be useful in life, what will be harmful in life. Then what contributes to pramana, to the measurement, to the span of life, and what is good for extending the span of life, what is not good for extending the span of life, what truncates that span of life. And how does this material world specifically work, this world of substance, of dravya, how does it work, and how do we navigate this material world through guna, through qualities, towards the above ends, towards understanding how to realize joy and avoid suffering, towards realizing and understanding how to extend our lifespan, to have a natural lifespan without suffering, and to avoid a shorter lifespan with suffering through the material means. That is what the Ayurveda is. That is what is going to be described. That is what Charak says. So, that is what it is. But we have to further, kind of explicate and deconstruct what it is for us now and what it is really, because it has taken on so many clothes to wear, you can say. That again, we think of Ayurveda. Ayurveda is 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Ayurveda is 7 dhatus, 7 tissue systems of the body, Rasa, Rakta, Mamsa, Meda, Asti, Maja, Shukra. Or Ayurveda is again just using herbs from India, Triphala and ashwagandha. If you take ashwagandha in the morning and triphala at night, you are Ayurvedic. Congratulations. But no, not quite. These are all just clothes that Ayurveda wears. So in this same conversation from Charak Samhita that I've mentioned to you, where he defines what is Ayurveda, his disciple, because this text is a conversation like a Bhagavad Gita, between the preceptor Punarvaswatreya and one of his disciples, Agnivesha. And so Punarvaswatreya, he defines Ayurveda as I've just mentioned. And this is from chapter, for any of you that are more abreast with Ayurveda or more interested, this is from chapter 30 of the Charaka Samhita Sutra Sthana, shlokas 23, and now we're going to 27. And so his disciple, he asks him, this Ayurveda, is it shashvata or it is ashashvata? That means, is it eternal? Is it an everlasting thing? Or is it non-eternal? Is it just a relative thing that you and I are speaking about now? And he responds, it is shashvata, it is eternal. Right? This knowledge is eternal. It is not a conditional knowledge. What is good for, what goes towards joy, what goes towards suffering, all these different things. What goes towards an increasing span of life, inhibiting span of life. Because this knowledge is eternal. It is not relative. Now, what does that mean? It is eternal. That is a huge statement to say something is eternal. Because almost everything that we can conceptualize and conceive of is relative. Humanity is certainly a relative thing. Humanity has, our current species, Homo sapiens sapiens, only 60,000 years old. And go back a few million and there is nothing even closely resembling us. And we too will not persist forever. We will be wiped out at some point. Even this planet we abide on is not eternal. It is highly relative. And it is a relatively young planet in relationship to others. Our sun, around which our planet orbits, is also a relative thing in time only. It is combusting and it will burn out and take our whole solar system with it. Right? The entirety of the galaxy and the universe has been created and destroyed so many times. None of this is eternal. But Ayurveda is. What a statement. So if it is eternal, certainly it is something beyond India and the traditions there. Certainly it is something beyond our languages, even Sanskrit. Certainly it is something beyond humanity. So what is it then? And how can it be said it is eternal? So for time's sake, I won't read entirety of the shloka to you, but I will just sort of summarize. The first thing that Punarvasu says is, he says, it has no beginning, right? It is eternal because it has no beginning. It is eternal because it deals with the swabhava, the inherent nature of Brahman itself. Brahman here meaning the biggest possible thing, right, of creation. And he says that within the srishti, within creation, within Brahman, there are continual manifestation. And while all of those manifestations are constantly changing, there are fundamental processes of expression that are the same. And this is mostly understood through the relationship between what is called Guna, between qualities, right? That the relationship between qualities is always the same. Most essentially, that like qualities increase the expression of other like qualities, and opposite qualities work against each other. So one metaphor for this is, you can say that in parentheses, xy in parentheses, squared, xy squared, xy being in parentheses, is equal to x squared times y squared. It's true. It's true. This is what Ayurveda is. Ayurveda is xy in parentheses squared is equal to x squared plus y squared. This is a law as Ayurveda can put forth. You can change x and y with any integer, right? But this will hold true. And so too, you can have humans, animals, Earth, Mars, all different kinds of possible presentations of creation as x and y. But what Ayurveda exists to describe is this greater relationship between qualities and between phenomena. That is just an introduction and jumping off point, of course, that it is a 5-year course of study from there, right? To understand those qualitative relationships that are in fact eternal. We don't have the time to go into it now, but I just want to give that to you so you have a more core essential understanding of what it is that Ayurveda is offering, that is so much beyond just these superficial concepts of Vata, Pitta, Kapha and like that. So looking at the future, as practitioners now, already we are in crisis because we have a dependency upon our predecessors with medicines, etc., and with the environmental changes that we see, even the ability of certain medicines is becoming antiquated. Medicines are becoming extinct, plants are becoming extinct, and of course, new things are coming. For instance, the herb Jatamamsi or Kushta, Sasareya Lapa, is used in so many formulas in Ayurveda, and it is on the CITES list now, and certainly it's not going to survive more than a few more decades, period, on this planet, right? So already the Vaidyas, Ayurvedic practitioners will say, what are we going to do? How will we continue to practice Ayurveda? It is on the one hand a very real concern, on the other hand is an amusing concern, looking at the greater cosmic nature of Ayurveda. There's a story, of Nagarjuna Maharaj, he was a physician to the Buddha, and he was a great Vaidya, a great Ayurvedic physician. And he was studying Ayurveda with his guru, with his teacher, and with other students. And at one point, his guru said, I want all of you to go out from the ashram here and find a plant or substance that is not a medicine, that cannot be used medicinally. And so they all go out, and they go 10 minutes into the forest and come back. Others, they go a few hours in the forest and come back. Others, a day or two and come back. And now many days have passed and still Nagarjuna hasn't returned. And the guru says, where is he? And sends all the other students out to find him. And they bring him back and he's crying and he's very disappointed. And the guru says, where were you? Where have you been? How come you haven't found anything? Why are you so disappointed? And he said, oh, Guruji, I'm so embarrassed and ashamed, but I looked everywhere and I just couldn't find anything that couldn't be used medicinally. And so this story, it is a beautiful story, but what it illustrates is again this principle of the eternal of how Ayurveda is eternal, because regardless of tradition, the tradition of using Triphala, the tradition of using Chawanprash, right? There is nothing but potential, right? Ayurveda is the perception that unlocks this perception of unbounded potential in all things. So certainly through this lens of perception through qualities, the Ayurvedic physician can meet any new technology, can meet any new medicine, can meet with metformin, lisinopril, can meet with the hyperbaric chambers, with the red light therapy, all of these things, and appraise the qualities of that instrument or of that medicine. And immediately then it is Ayurvedic. Immediately then we can continue with this greater tradition that is not bound to country or place or even to history. I'll say one more thing and then hand it over because I know I speak too much and we're at 8:46. But a kind of greater kind of insight on what this Ayurveda really is and therefore how it will move with us into the future is with its purported origin. So in asking where does this Ayurveda come from, in our Samhita it says Brahma Smritva Ayusho Vedam Prajavati Majigrahat Soshrinatau Sahasraksham Sotriputradi Kanmunin. That this Ayurveda comes from Brahma, the kind of creator God, but not actually comes from him, but rather Smritva, he remembered it. He brought forth the creation, and when he brought it forth, then he remembered Ayurveda. He did not create it. It was a priori. And then he gave it to Prajapati, the greater progenitive gods, who gave it to the Ashwins, who gave it to Indra, these are all Vedic gods, who then gave it to the sages. But what we find there, the key to unlock what this really means is given later in the text in Charaka Samhita, Sharirasthana 5. And he kind of elaborates this concept of that's very essential to Ayurveda called Loka Parusha Samya, which is that the world is the person and the person is the world. There is actually no difference here. And all these greater things in God, they exist within the person as well. And so what is the Brahma, this creator God, that remembered Ayurveda, that remembered this knowledge? That Brahma Charaka says in his later text, later chapter, Sharirasthana, chapter 5, and it is Shloka 5. He says that Brahma, that greater God, is the potential of creation. So that means this Ayurveda is there in the potential of creation. Brahma smritva yusho vedam prajapati ajigrahat. He gives it, or it is grasped then by prajapati, by the creator. And what is the creator? The creator is the soul, the Atma, right? So it is inherent in creation. Our souls then grasp this knowledge. Then Prajapati gives it to Ashwin Kumars. And the Ashwin Kumars, he says in this later chapter, what are they? They are the prana, they are the life force, right? From the soul, the life force gets this knowledge. And from the Ashwin Kumars, they give it to Indra. And Indra is equated by Charaka with Ahankar, with the ego. From the life force, our sense of self, the ego, it gets this knowledge. And from that, it is given to the sages, who represent sense faculties, etc., etc. So this is not actually historical origin. It is an ever dynamic birth of this knowledge. So it cannot be lost by the future, and it has so much to give to the future. And most importantly, what it has to give is this Loka Purush Samya, this understanding and this perception that we are not separate parts, that our skin is actually not a threshold or a barrier between us and the world, that there is actually no within and without, that this is all a continuum of interrelated phenomena, and that whatever happens on Mars, whatever happens in North Korea, that affects me. And whatever happens in me affects all of that this is all a continuum. And Ayurveda is, above all else, that knowledge of how to navigate this continuum. So last thing I will leave you with is, what does that mean practically with recourse to disease, with recourse to management of medicine, and with recourse to management of ourselves and relationships? This is also from Charak Samhita, but from his Nidanastan, chapter 7, and it is the 21st shloka that I'd like to share with you. He says, Prajna aparadhata sambhute vyadhau karmaja atmanaha Nabhi shamsed budho devana pitruna api rakshasana atmanameva manyeta kartaram sukha dukhayo tasmat shreyaskaram margam pratipadyeta no traset. So he says that all diseases, whether they seem to arise from some action, or whether they seem to arise as if from your own karma or from yourself, that it was genetic, right? Actually, all of the disease and all of the suffering, it is nothing but prajna aparad. It is arising from nothing but the going against the true wisdom, right? Having the wrong perception. He says that the devatas, the gods, we can't blame the gods for disease and suffering. Our ancestors, the Pitrus, we can't blame our ancestors who gave our genetic code. We can't blame them for the suffering, for disease. Even the Rakshasas, the demons, the COVID, we can't blame that for the suffering and for disease. It is all coming from the wrong perception. Therefore, the only practical way forward is through this identification of ourselves with the world, and therefore holding ourselves responsible for all of our sukha and dukkha, for all of our happiness and misery. Knowing that this world is nothing but us, And therefore, holding ourselves responsible, we should ever seek to follow the path of welfare for all things with no apprehension. And so with that, may it be a prayer for us that we can all imbibe the practical elements of this philosophy and create a bright future together. So thank you so much for that. And now, Vladimir, Radhe, excuse me, any questions that I'm available for.
And thank you so very much. And if any of the attendees have a question, you could just type it in the chat or the Q&A. And I will just ask a question as I'm listening to your wonderful explanation and insight about Ayurveda. You have a Panchakarma clinic. You run an institute there. So as people come for medicine, for cleansing, for purification of the body and the senses, and obviously coming for a treatment and herbs, how do you impart and share with them this knowledge that you just shared with us that is so much deeper than the outer treatment of the senses or of the body or even of the mind? Is there a place during that week or 2-week Panchakarma that they get to, that you get to share and they get to assimilate this wisdom?
Sure.
And this approach, this perception?
It's a very beautiful question. Thank you for that. Radhe, I think that that is shared most simply in the space of hello. Right? Because again, it is a shift of perception, and that perception has to radiate through and manifest through every element of practice. Right? And so that perception gets shared from simply walking through the door. And through all of these treatments. It's not a conversation. There are many conversations, but it's not transferred through a conversation. It's transferred through every interaction, right? And it is transferred through that kind of greater exploration of what is disease. And also, the nice thing about Ayurveda and about, that it is largely expressing through this physical world, through substances, through herbs, through treatments, Panchakarma, is that we can use the physical to initiate that shift of perception, even without the conversation. And I'll say, in our clinic, a great majority of the people that come do not come because they have any interest in Ayurveda. They come because they're suffering. And they come because they're suffering, and they come because nothing else has worked. So they don't care that it's Ayurveda from India, or if it was, some other system from Nigeria. They don't care. They don't have any interest in that. They're just coming because, they've tried everything else, and someone told them, maybe you will get relief here. And so we are able to have this conversation and this journey together, often without using any kind of Sanskrit terminology or discussion of these texts, right? But really through the treatments and through the most essential communication. I'll share one story with you. There was a woman that we treated recently who had a unidentified autoimmune disorder, right? So no one could give her a diagnosis of what she has. And she had been to many specialists around the US. And symptomatically, what she was having is that about 3 to 4 times a week, she would have very violent bouts of diarrhea and vomiting that would then progress to just dry heaving and distension. And this would last for several hours at a time and be totally debilitating. And after every bout, she would be exhausted for at least a few days. But it would happen several times a week. So that means she's been exhausted for about 20 years. Right. And again, no one could give her a diagnosis. What's wrong with her? And she did all kinds of treatments, nothing gave her a result. So we started working at a distance with herbs and fundamental things with the Dinacharya, which, who was it you said, Maria or Sunny shared with you guys, and diet, etc. And then she came for Panchakarma. And on her second day of Panchakarma, she said to me, you know what? I just feel so hopeful. I said, well, that's good. You should be hopeful. But why? What is it that made the shift for you? She said, I've been to so many doctors' offices. I've been to so many treatment centers. And it was just bewildering to me that everyone here, there's 11 staff here. She says, it's bewildering to me that everyone here looks healthy. She said, it is just simply bewildering to me that everyone here looks healthy and everyone feels healthy. And I think that's also possible for me, just being around all of you. I said, wow, that's great. And sure enough, not simply by that, but by greater means also, within 1 week of her Panchakarma, and I'm not saying we can cure everything, but within 1 week, she was jogging. She'd never had the energy to hardly even move around and perform basic daily tasks. She was jogging. Now she's getting ready for a half marathon, and that is a closed chapter of her life. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So that shift in perception occurred because of the perception that was being held within that environment of your clinic by yourself and others. Yeah,
sure.
Beautiful.
And again, we can shift the perception of the body, of the cells, right, through certain treatments, because they also have perception.
Sure, absolutely. Good. Anyone with questions, or Vladimir, comments? Or I see HP, who is owner here of the center and of our university, has joined too during the talk. Any questions or observations?
Right, I can give an observation. I noticed one interesting thing when I was in Arogya clinic, and we had long discussions on how Ayurveda works and what it means. And I noticed very interesting thing that Ayurveda works as if through Kashyapa, observing you, Kashyapa, how you think. You always think from bigger picture to from bigger principles towards so you have to recognize that higher or deeper consciousness within or above, which kind of connects you to the physical reality. In a way, it has to be cognized, it has to be somewhere linked, and once it is linked, you could proceed looking for the answers, and there can be many answers. Also, it's very interesting, many different approaches which may be less or more effective, and you are tuning to that everything has to be tuned finally, and then it's done. It's quite amazing. So it's all consciousness related, perception related, as you were speaking today of. It's that ashashvata knowledge.
Sure. If we look at the cause of disease, and even if you want to say the cause of, atherosclerosis is, a diet that, increases cholesterol levels too much, right? But then prior to that substance, the butters or trans fats, etc., that is increasing cholesterol. What is the desire for that? Why is there a desire? And then what informs the method of purchasing it, the method of preparing it, the method of moving it from plate to mouth, right? All of that is the perception, right? And all of that is the grounds for transformation.
Good. Thank you. We have just a couple comments of gratitude. Seema, thank you for your thoughts and valuable lessons. Aurelio, a wonderful exposition of deeper and universal background of Ayurveda. Thank you. And we do have a question that's come up. What would be the best way to bring this knowledge and wisdom tradition into education? Can that happen institutionally, or does it depend on the transmission in the guru-shishya tradition? And this is Aurelio.
Aurelio, thanks for the question. It's a beautiful one. And I think I really think it's essential knowledge in institutions, whether you want to call it Ayurveda or not, or call it Ayurveda or something else, I think it's something that our children especially are really lacking, is just this any instruction in how to be. They learn mathematics and English and Spanish and history and all this, but they don't learn how to simply be with themselves and how to navigate this physical world. And now, at least when I was a kid, and I was a kid not that long ago, okay, I'm still kind of a kid, but at least when I was a kid, we had home ec of like, don't put the knife in the dishwasher with the point up, right? And that's also mostly, I in my daughter's school, she doesn't have home ec, right? That's all, even this basic stuff is leaving, and people need it in such a great way, right? In such a great way. It is the root of so many things. So yeah, there's a terrible need for it. And I think with Ayurveda, it is not needed in a Guru Shishya environment. And in fact, perhaps of all of the Vedic Vidyas, Ayurveda is unique in that it is considered a Yukti Pradhan Vidya, and the transmission of it is not through the Guru Vakyam, not through the mouth of the Guru, but through the Samhita, through the texts that have been passed forth. So, well, on the grosser level, even in the Charaka Samhita, there's a story that when Agni Vesha produced this text, it was considered to be the first one. That when he wrote it down, all of the gods and all of the potentials, they started celebrating, and they saw that this is very good for humanity. This is essential for humanity, and because it is so essential, it cannot be entrusted even to the gurus. It cannot be entrusted to anyone because it is so essential, right? And so all of the gods and all of the gurus and all of the sages, they all put their Shakti, they all put their energy and their consciousness into that text, so that that text would last through time, right? And be always available to people without having to go see the guru in the ashram, right? And then again, at the deeper level, it is this ashashvata, it is this kind of inherent knowledge that is had from the exploration within into our true nature, right? From the creation to the soul, to the ego, through the senses. It is that knowledge which arises. And so it is ever present and available, actually. What is not available is that space within our lives to reflect and realize that. But yeah, I really think it should be taught from day one of life. and through whatever institutions it can.
Great, and we do just have a couple more here if you've got a few minutes, Kashyapa. Is there a recommended book to read to learn the foundations of Ayurveda?
Oh, that's the most difficult question so far. The ultimate jewel is the Charaka Samhita. That but it is not so approachable by most. A little bit more approachable is Ashtanga Hridayam, but it is still a little difficult. Beyond that, I think it is called, give me a moment. The author is L. Mahadevan. And I forget if it is called a beginner's guide or simple Ayurveda. Just give me one moment to look it up.
Sure, no problem. And also, while Kashyapa is looking that up, I have put our website URL, www.lagrassecenter.com, in the chat box. And this talk is being recorded and will be posted in the next 24 hours. And so if you want to re-listen to it, and also I put my email address, rade@lagrassecenter.com. If you have any other comments or questions or feedback, please feel free to email us. Go ahead, Kashyapa.
It's simply called Ayurveda for Beginners by L. Mahadevan. That's Mahadevan.
For beginners. Perfect. Okay.
And then it is the problem that we find is we find too many interpretations that go away from the real kernel of what it is. And his Ayurveda for Beginners is very simple and straight to the point. And it allows you to realize the interpretation through your own experience rather than kind of suggesting that.
Perfect. So we'll take just one last question here. Does Ayurveda have an answer to the misconception and suffering created by COVID? I know, sorry.
That's sort of what we started with also. Madhya and Raja and I were talking a little bit about that. Well, so, I think one thing that COVID really shows, without kind of getting into the pathophysiology of COVID from a allopathic or Ayurvedic perspective. But one thing that COVID really shows, and I think it can be considered as a great blessing in this regard, is just the infinite world we all live in, actually, right? Which is revealed by our response to it, right? I think that what the first thing. Oh, wow. We could speak for 2 hours. We spoke for 45 minutes on the future of Ayurveda. We could speak for 2 hours on this question. There is, I'll just share this. There is in Charaka Samhita Vimanasthana 4, there is a discussion of what is called as Janapadudvamsa, of the things that affect the people in a wide spectrum, right? Like like epidemics and pandemics. Mm-hmm. So that is where Ayurveda discusses it in this concept of Janapadudvamsa. And of course, I mentioned in the talk, there is really, perhaps COVID was engineered, perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps it was engineered on the, molecular level. Perhaps it is a naturally occurring thing. Right? Perhaps it was our response to it, government by government, society, was engineered, or perhaps not. Perhaps it is just the response. Who knows? And who will ever know, really? Right? So that is the first thing, is to realize who will ever know. And so we have to first attenuate ourselves to being comfortable with that unknown. Okay, this is the first thing. But in this Janapadudvamsa, in looking at the factors that are responsible for epidemics, because epidemics is nothing new. COVID is really, things like COVID is nothing new, right? We had the Hong Kong flu in 1967, right? We had the Spanish flu before that. We've had so many countless plagues and pestilences, in the history of humanity. No one can even tabulate it. So it is nothing new. So in looking at this discussion of Janapadudvamsa, first, what are the causes within Ayurveda? The cause is not being engineered in a lab or arising from a meat market. That is never the cause within Ayurveda. What is the cause fundamentally in Ayurveda? It again goes back to this idea of loka purusha samya, that I am the world is me, right? The fundamental cause is the loss of dharma. That is stated explicitly. That when people go away from proper action and harmony with themselves, with their relationship with society, and with nature, the response of nature is plague, is epidemics, right? It is a natural, like, immune response of nature, that when humans start to move away from dharma, there will be, for sure, the epidemics. Just like if we go away from proper lifestyle and dietary things, we will get fever, okay? If you stay up all night working or this or that, and take substances which are harmful for you, and the likely result is that you get sick. Mm-hmm. So that is just the macro manifestation of the same, this COVID, right, this epidemic. So this is the first, most explicit thing that Ayurveda says, or Charaka says, in chapter 4 of his Vimanasthana, in the topic of Janapadudvamsa, that when the Dharma is lost, there will be the epidemics, period. So that is a causative factor in Ayurveda's vision, is this loss of integrity of this most fundamental relationship. So that is the first thing on the concept. Then, how to manage it. And this part is even more interesting. The preceptor, Punarvasutreya, he says, we should always anticipate that these epidemics will come. And therefore, during good times, we must make medicines and store medicines that have great potency so that we can use them in bad times, right? So whenever there is a good time, we must harvest that good time. So we have to always be producing medicines and saving medicines that we can use at these bad times, because the greater concept of Ayurveda too, and this is, we're starting to bleed into a different topic, but that is, again, coming to these kind of qualities and qualities of matter, is that, it's not simply that a herb like ashwagandha has quality, okay, that it is sweet and pungent and bitter in taste and those are certain qualities, but also that substance and any substance is also qualitatively affected by the spirit of the times. So that means that if there is a lack of dharma, that vibration of adharma is radiating into the ashwagandha that's growing, correct? So Ayurveda takes appraisal of that. So the ashwagandha that's growing at a time when dharma is flowing in a good way, right? When the stars are arranged in a beneficial way, that the soma is coming down to the earth, it has to be harvested then and saved for the future, for when the times will change. So that it has that potency, that kind of energetic potency. So he gives the instruction, you should, harvest all of these medicines, that produce these medicines in the good times, specifically to use for the bad times, for the epidemics. But then further, he says, then how should the Vaidya, the Bishak, the one who is practicing medicine, who's going to be interacting with the patients that are suffering from epidemics, how should they compose themselves? What should they do to protect themselves? The student asks the teacher, okay, we keep the medicines, and how do we protect ourselves as we go like that? The teacher says, basically, he doesn't say anything that you should wear gloves, or you should avoid the patients, or you should take this special herb. He says you should practice yamas and niyamas. That you should practice santosha, peacefulness, right? Don't expect peacefulness. It is a practice. You have to make yourself peaceful, right? So he says, and that is a profound statement. It is really a profound statement. It is easy to just say practice peacefulness. Yeah. Okay. I'll say Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti once a day. No, but that means you are responsible for your peacefulness or not. So if you're watching MSNBC every night at the new COVID numbers, or getting angry about how this politician's handling it or that politician's handling it, this is not going towards santosha. This is not going towards peacefulness. And this is depriving you then of your resilience and immunity, right? So you have to take responsibility, not just for what you eat, but also for the data that you consume, right? The media that you consume, the conversations that you have. If this conversation is going towards anger, it is depriving you of peacefulness, it is depriving you of integrity and resilience. Right? If it goes towards fear, it is depriving you of those things. So what yamas and yamas, we won't go through them one by one, right? This is from yoga, but it is, again, it is explicitly stated there in this part of the Ayurvedic text too, that you should practice the self-control, you should practice truthfulness, you should control your sensory urges, right? All of these things. That is the main prescription of handling it, right? And we can see, I won't go too into it because, again, it is material for hours, but we received a number of COVID patients here in our clinic, right? And it's not that we have any miracle cure or anything like that, but overall, none of our patients, even my very first COVID patient was in January of 2020, and we didn't even realize they were a COVID patient because it was so early on in the pandemic. And that person was 200 pounds overweight and had a history of pneumonia and was diabetic, like as high risk as it gets. And that person was around 70 years of age. About as high risk as it gets. And not only was that patient managed quite easily, but we all interacted with that patient, myself and my staff. Again, at the time, I wasn't trying to be brazen or anything. We didn't know, right? It was too early in the pandemic for us to even think, oh, this might be a COVID person, right? They weren't even doing the PCR testing really, it was available, but it was, at that time, it wasn't like you could just go and get the PCR test. You had to make an appointment. There's days wait, etc. And so that person was managed, and none of us that interacted with that person got COVID. Mhm. Right. And so I'm not trying to say, don't worry about it, just go and like that, but I think there is a great utility in these yamas and niyamas and in that power of perception. So hopefully that's helpful. Again, it is a conversation that go on for a very long time with Ayurveda and COVID.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kashyapa. We really appreciate you staying over to answer these questions and for sharing your wisdom and your profound approach to life, to spirit, and doing Ayurveda a great justice. So very much appreciate it, and hopefully we will continue this dialogue with you in the future.
Okay, thank you so much for
Good.
having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kashyapa. All the
Namaste.
best.